Thank you very much, Kerry. We have got the first session for you now, which is a bit of a workshop exploring early talent team structures. So this is one of the topics that came out in our last session today. I think a number of people who are part of the GECG are currently either restructuring or shaping or thinking about how they structure and resource their early careers teams. So that was a request. And on the back of that, Faisal, our member from eBay, also put a survey out through the GECG LinkedIn group, which a number of people responded to. Thank you very much. So Faisal has very kindly shared the results of that survey, which I'm going to share with you today, as well as some broader insights as well. So I've obviously personally worked in all kinds of different organizations and early careers teams. I've shaped them, I've led them, and I've run them. I've worked with lots of different clients who have different shapes and structures too. We've also, whilst we don't have lots of data for Germany, we're also able to benchmark against what resourcing looks like in other parts of the world. So whilst we don't have a really large sample from Faisal's population, so we can't say with absolute certainty it's representative of what's happening in all teams in Germany, it gives us an indication of what's happening in Germany. So I thought to kind of compare with that, it would be useful to look at some of these UK statistics, so we can get a sense of whether or not what's different really between what we're hearing from our members in Germany and what we're seeing from the data in the UK. So this comes from the Institute of Student Employers. There are two different sets of stats here. And again, for anybody who likes to furiously scribble away the stats, we will send you a copy of today's presentation. So you don't need to capture all these bits and pieces if you don't have time, but we'll be sending it to you. So the average mean spend, so the average mean is when you add up all of the responses and divide it by all of the respondents to give you a mean. Underneath, you'll also see the median average, which is when you stack all of the responses from bottom to top, and the typical one being the middle of the pack. So you can see there is a difference here between the mean average and the median average from the Institute of Student Employers. So I've given you both because sometimes that mean average can be a little bit misleading. Some people spend an awful lot more money and it skews things, or some people have much bigger teams like the PwCs of this world who've got 40, 50 people working on early careers alone. I know, horrifying. Really big teams that can skew the mean average. That median average underneath, I would say that's more typical of what people spend. So that would be the one that I'd encourage you to look at rather than that big headline grabbing number. Those numbers underneath are more typical. So more typically, they're spending £2,449 per hire, early career hire. On average, their early career team size is 5 people. And that last statistic on the end is what we call the recruiter to student ratio. So that is the number of students that every recruiter in the early careers team is responsible for hiring each year. Now, if you're looking at that and thinking 26 students a year, that's all one person has to hire. Are you kidding me? I know, right? It's that what we've discovered is that the numbers are dramatically different on that piece in particular in Germany. And I think the reason for that is that the UK market is much more skewed towards graduate programs, which are really structured. They're very long, kind of 2 to 3 years long, whereas the German market is much more skewed towards shorter early careers experiences like working students and interns, where you therefore have many more hires. The investment is lower risk for the organisation, and so forth. Therefore, less kind of time and energy is spent in really making sure they're absolutely the right hire for a long-term investment on a graduate scheme. So we will get some stats from what Faisal gathered from his survey from our group in Germany. But I would say of those 3 figures, that last one about the recruiter ratio is typically where we see it much higher. I know that I was chatting to Tina at Personio. I don't know if any of Tina's team from Personio is here today. A couple of Tina's team joined us last time, but she couldn't make it today. she's saying, you know, both of her team members are more like 50 plus every year that they're hiring. I dread to think what the number is for Zalando now, Kate, in terms of the number of hires per recruiter. What do you think you're up to?
I don't know. We'll see at the end of the year.
Who knows? A couple of hundred. It could be a huge number. So if you're looking at that number thinking, gosh, we hire a lot more than 21, I'm thinking about Armin and Imran at Enterprise. I'm sure your targets are significantly more stretching than 21 per recruiter. I wouldn't say that's unusual for Germany. Kerry, you have worked running graduate recruitment programs in Germany. What would you add in terms of the kind of recruiter ratio that you were having there, or the stats?
Yeah, I was just going to mention from my most recent experience working for Hewlett Packard Enterprise recruiters across Europe were also sitting on 50.
I can't hear you very well, Kerry. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. One sec. Let's see. Is that any better?
Yeah, that's a little bit better. Yeah.
Okay, good. So yes, in my most recent experience at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, people were also sitting on 50 plus vacancies. Yeah. And what I was going to say is what might skew that number down a little bit as well is those organisations where the recruitment team are responsible for a lot more than just the recruitment. So perhaps they're doing elements of the programme management or attraction on top of just the hiring. So I think that might, you know, I think my experience and how things work on the investment banking side, it was very much you do your hiring, then you go on to managing the programs, the content, the learning and development, and I think that might be the case for a lot of the ISE members as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kerry. So for those who couldn't hear, Kerry is clearly, she was saying Hewlett Packard, when she was recruiting most recently for them in Germany, it was more like 50 plus in terms of that recruiter ratio. Anything anybody would like to ask me about those ISE stats that you're interested in? As I say, they're obviously UK rather than Germany, so we have to put them into context, but they're big numbers, so there's much more validity to them. You know, we're talking about hundreds of employers responding to this survey, whereas our Germany specific data is much smaller numbers. So I kind of want to give you both, so you've got something to benchmark against, something that's German specific but low number of respondents, whereas something that's UK specific but large number of respondents has perhaps got greater validity. Is there anything you'd like to ask about that ISE data in terms of how they structure things, how many recruiters they have? So for example, many people might, you know, if they were dramatically changing the number of students they wanted to hire, they say, okay, that's fine. That would mean, to reverse engineer it, I need maybe like 2 new recruiters in early careers to be able to fulfill that requirement. That's what people would use this for. Or to say, hang on, we're massively outperforming our competitors here. we're doing a lot more than other people. Look at what a great job we're doing for the organisation. Anything anybody would like to add or question or would like to understand more about those stats before we move on? No? Okay, super. Let's move on then, because they're the headline numbers. It's worthwhile saying that there are significant differences from one sector to another. So you can see that law, for example, has one of the lowest recruiter ratios in terms of the number of students that they recruit for, but also their cost per hire is crazy high. They spend huge amounts of money in the legal sector. I know, Kate, can you believe it? £10,000 per early careers hire. Like, oh, dreaming of having that kind of money. So whereas at the other end of things, there are other environments where you get many, many more hires per recruiter, and the cost per hire is a great example there is financial and professional services. So that's where you get, you know, a lot of the big accountancy firms, professional services firms. One of the reasons they have such high recruiter ratios and reasonably low cost per hire is because they recruit in really huge volumes. So they're recruiting, you know, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 students per year. And when you're recruiting on that kind of scale, you get big economies of scale. So things become cheaper for every hire, because you only need to pay for one employer brand, you only need to pay for one website. If you're doing it for 100 or 1,000 or 3,000, that cost gets split. And obviously when you're recruiting, assessment technology or platforms or buying licenses, you've got a lot more buying power when you've got that kind of size as well. So that allows them to really bring that cost down. So some of these things are about sectoral differences in terms of the volumes of people that they recruit as well. Many people here are from digital and IT tech sector. We did do a Germany specific little survey last year of the digital and IT sector. I would say that cost per hire was a comparable, actually, just a little bit lower in Germany than it was in the UK. But the recruiter ratio was much, much higher. They were recruiting many more students in the tech sector in Germany. And we also saw that the time to hire was dramatically faster in Germany than it was in the UK. So the average time to hire from when somebody puts in an application form to when they get a job offer is just over 8 weeks in the UK in early careers and student recruitment. I think it came out at just over 14 days in the tech sector in Berlin when we did the survey last year. So really, really quick. Now, naturally, the market has changed a lot since last year, particularly for digital and tech, but it was startling how much difference there was between the UK and Germany in terms of speed to offer. But that was primarily a digital and tech survey that we did last year. Again, small numbers, but useful for those of you who are in that particular market. Anything you would like to ask about or know about in terms of any of this stats or data, or things that in terms of how it compares to your sector or your market? Or anything our universities would like to know about this that you find fascinating? Right. Armin and Imran, to let you know, typically enterprise, obviously it doesn't naturally fit into these typical sectors, but where it tends to get reported in the Institute of Student Employers sector is in the retail and FMCG group. So fast moving, customer facing, although you're not technically either retail or FMCG, that's where the enterprise data tends to get reported. And they're the kind of most akin in terms of the customer service type and like the working hours and, the 24/7 nature of the operation. So that's where it tends to get categorized if you're thinking, which one would I look at? Would anybody else be uncertain which your comparator group might be? Or is everybody happy that they can see what their comparator would be? Everybody's happy. Okay, great. So in terms of early talent team structures, there are so many different ways that they can look. So sometimes you have a completely central early careers team, where they are the centre of expertise for early careers, either in country or for the European region or for the globe. And you're a centre of expertise for early talent end to end, often if you're a centre of expertise. So from onboarding and recruitment right through to induction and programme management. And, if you do any rotations or different programmes, educational programmes and things like that, that would all sit together in this centre of expertise with L&D and recruitment and employer brand people and campus people all working together in that early careers centre of expertise. In other models, you have it much more devolved. So you might have somebody who sits in talent acquisition who looks after a bit of early careers as part of their job. Somebody who sits in learning and development who has a brief for early careers as part of their job, and then somebody who sits in employer brand who has the on-campus strategy or the early careers brand strategy as part of their job. So that's much more devolved across different teams and different departments. There are, as you might imagine, pros and cons to both. So the big pros of having a centre of expertise is that early careers and future talent is it's a very complex and niche environment. So you've got people who really understand this environment, how it's different. You know, early careers hiring is very different to experienced hiring. And if you're the early careers person sat in a talent acquisition team, it can be quite frustrating that nobody else understands how your job is different. Charlotte's smiling at me like, yes, nobody understands. We don't just stick an advert out and people come like they're doing experienced hire. It's not like that. That can be the frustration of that more devolved model. The advantage of the centralized model is that you do have that deep expertise and you can manage the whole process end to end. You know, you can really get to know people. You can see them all the way through the process, that your team's really in control of that. However, the devolved model does have some advantages in that it makes sure that the experience your early careers hires aligns to the experience that everybody else in the organization has. It lines up with the broader employer brand. It lines up with the broader L&D strategy. It lines up with the broader induction experience and onboarding experience. So there are advantages and disadvantages to either going center of expertise or devolved into the different teams. What we often see is a hybrid model where there's elements of different bits. You know, I think enterprise is a great example of this, where you have got people who've got global expertise in terms of early careers, but then actually the Germany team have got their own strategy and you're implementing it in your own way. So Armin, Imran, I don't know if you want to talk about how you connect in terms of your German team, both with your talent acquisition colleagues out in the field, because you're really like the early careers leaders, aren't you, centrally, but then your talent acquisition teams get involved in lots of stuff out in the field. And then you've got this kind of bigger corporate global outside of Germany early careers strategy that you're connected into as well. So I don't know if you want to maybe share what that looks like, feels like for you as part of a bigger organization.
Yeah, definitely. Why not? So I would start, Armin. What Armin and I try to do is like the same strategy. We share Germany in two parts, where one taking Armin like the middle western part, and I have the southern and eastern part of Germany. And we try to work really close to the senior management. That starts with the general managers down to the HR managers, to all the area managers, to work really closely with them. And to also tell them how important the job is we are doing. So and getting connected with all the people out there, and also with the talent acquisition team, that we say like, hey, we want you to also be involved. Like, for example, I have a careers fair, or I'm going to be, like yesterday we did at Berlin in a high school in Berlin, the talent acquisition team is going to attend to all the things we do outside the field to have the relationship close with them. And maybe Armin will also share a few words about it.
Lovely. We can't hear you, Armin. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Absolutely. It's how Imran said, and the great thing is that we can take expertise from UK and US who are doing it like for years or decades, and that's a great opportunity. So we are also working global, and we can take the global expertise to take all the positive things that we can maybe implement also in Germany. So that's a great opportunity also that we have.
Implement and tweak, so it's right for Germany.
Yeah.
And sometimes that works really, really well when you've got great global teams that you can tweak things and change things and do things differently. Now, all of this is kind of the broad structure of how you might want to think about how you put your early teams together, or how you scale and grow your teams for the future. So you might be thinking, oh, well, I've got a preference actually for a center of expertise end to end, or a preference for things being devolved across the business, or that hub and spoke where we're working in partnership with different people in different ways. One of the things that I talk about there in the bullet points that perhaps you won't see as much in the academic research, but is the reality of how these structures come to be, is also like individual preferences and power and politics. So actually there's just somebody in the business who's like, no, that's my apprenticeship program and I've always looked after it and I always will. That's just staying over here and that's mine. Or, you know, a new person comes up to head up TA, or a new person who comes up to head up L&D, and they've got very clear views about where things should be going and what they want the strategy to look like. So there is obviously this kind of organization design thinking you can put behind it about which approach you want to take. But pretty much every organization I've worked in terms of early careers, there's always a bit of messiness around the edges, and that messiness usually relates to history, individuals, what they're interested in, and what people don't do or don't want to let go of. Kerry, you look like you want to add to that.
Yes, I was just going to add. So in my recent experience, I found that messiness existed, in certain markets across Europe where there is crossover between the levels of experience. So actually, it's very hard to distinguish what is an early career role, i.e. someone who's actually recently graduated, and what is a pure graduate role. And therefore, I found that partnership with talent acquisition on the experience side was more important in the German market than perhaps it will be in the UK market. So I think that's a really important point to make, that the line is often not as clear cut where there's a lot of people graduating and they've got a lot of work experience behind them, which is often the case in Germany, I find.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do see a lot more kind of blurring of the lines, I think, with our German clients, and also a lot more kind of things that you don't know about, that have just popped up that people magically expect. Oh, well, you know about this internship program that we've launched, or you know about these students that we've hired over here, and a local manager's struck up a partnership with someone, or it's been going for years and nobody's ever thought to tell you, but you magically know about it. So I think we tend to see a lot of that in Germany in terms of those local partnerships, and a lot of that kind of messiness between what is an early careers hire and what isn't an early careers hire as well. So again, if you're experiencing some of that as you're trying to think about how you shape or scale or structure your team for future, hopefully that's reassuring to know that we do see that quite a bit in different places and different markets as well.
And it sounds like, sorry, Rebecca, I was just going to say, it sounds like Armin and Imran's kind of partnership there, where you kind of had a talent acquisition team with you, is certainly the way that we would suggest going ahead and addressing that, a real partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly if you don't have much in terms of dedicated resource to early careers, and you've got high student numbers, it's frankly the only way to go is to persuade and engage and bring your TA colleagues, your talent acquisition colleagues over to the wonderful benefits of early careers and early talent hires. So that's a bit about the kind of bigger picture of structures and teams and how they tend to be shaped and sized, what that very valid survey from the UK tells us about what the numbers look like. Let's now just delve into the survey that Faisal did, that many of you very kindly contributed to. So this is going to give us Germany early career specific data about early talent team structures, but clearly it's a reasonably small sample size. This isn't anywhere near as valid a sample size as the ISE one. So we kind of put it in that context. It's useful, all data is useful as long as we contextualize it, isn't it? So one of the first questions that Faisal asked was the type of university recruitment pattern that you use. So we had a really interesting discussion about this at the last meeting at Adidas. Is this something that you kind of do ad hoc whenever somebody needs an intern or a working student? You get a job rec through and you've got to hire into that job straight away. Is this kind of a circular recruiting pattern? So you bring them all in cohorts at certain points in the year and they're all joining at certain times, or is it a little bit of both? And you can see that there's a mixture of different responses there from our GECG members. I was surprised by how small the ad hoc one was, though. I thought most people would still be very much in that quite responsive state, and a lot of folks that we've worked with are in that position, but I was surprised by how many have moved towards that more bringing people on certain dates as a program, or all at the same time, and how many people do have elements of both as well. I don't know if anybody's got kind of questions or comments or anything you'd add to whether or not that's a debate you're having internally at the moment. Do we do them all in one go, or don't we do them all in one go, or should we be having like start dates for everybody? I don't know if anybody's got anything they would add to that in terms of what you're doing or experiencing at the moment with your intakes? No. Okay.
I think it's interesting, Rebecca, because I wonder how much of it is actually linked to the requirements of universities with people starting on set dates. Is that driven by the fact that, you know, for working students, you know, or placement students, they have to start on a set date? For example, I know at HPE we had dates in Germany and Austria set in advance for those groups, and everything else was done ad hoc at the graduate level. But those internships were the ones that followed those set patterns. So does anyone else share that experience?
Yeah, I don't know if maybe like Michael or Eloise or Martina from our universities, or Lars from your experience in universities, you can add to that. Is there an element of kind of academic alignment for some of those compulsory internships?
Yeah, I would definitely say that we have very much aligned semester dates in Germany. So typically there is a slight difference between public and state institutions. So public institutions tend to start in September, while state institutions tend to start a month later in October. And then it's really the academic calendar that is more or less, well, showing or identifying when these typical spots for the so-called mobility windows are. So for study abroad, and that's of course also true for internships, as well as annual application periods. So when have you finished with the last exams and can really start thinking about the job and starting in that career? So I would say there's a strong alignment from the academic calendars and diaries to the recruitment pattern here.
Okay, lovely. So that's maybe what's making up those bigger numbers in that yellow that I was a bit surprised by, those more structured ones. Lovely. Type of programs you're hiring for. So again, this is Germany early career specific. Trainees being the lowest, the most popular being graduates. I was surprised by this as well. I thought internships were going to be number one, but no, graduates were amongst our GECG members. So that was really interesting for me. And apprenticeships, about half of our respondents were also hiring for apprenticeships. I know we had an interesting question from Danny Matthews about apprenticeships, Lars, that you were very kindly able to help with in the GECG group as well. So if anybody is working on apprenticeships and wants some data to access, I know there's a great question and link to some very good data there for anybody who is recruiting for those. It was a specific type of apprenticeship, Lars. I can't remember, Arbor something. What type of it was? Is a German word for apprenticeships that I hadn't come across before that Danny was asking about.
Ausbildung.
Azubi. It's the abbreviation of the Auszubildende. Yeah, indeed. We wanted to have the average cost on Azubis, and yeah, that's that combination of university degree and university career plus the traditional apprenticeship. So this Ausbildungs part that is then being sometimes in connection with a school or an academy, and sometimes in the dual. So there are different types of a dual program and a dual setup. So there might be a third learning place involved. And then it's more that traditional apprenticeship with the Auszubildende.
Lovely. So if anybody wants some Azubi data, there's a very good post in the LinkedIn group where you can go and have a look around that, courtesy of Lars. Thank you very much for sharing and for answering Danny's question, much appreciated. So our next question that Faisal asked in the survey was, what percentage of your workforce qualifies as emerging talent? More than 10%. I like 1 in 5 of our respondents said more than 10% qualify as emerging talent or early career hires. Less than 5% is the majority, obviously, but between 5 and 10% or more than 10%. I was really surprised by that. There's something in the UK called the 5% Club, which is where employers commit to at least 5% of their workforce being young people, early careers, future talent. And there's a huge swathe of employers who are nowhere near 5% yet. So obviously Germany in our small sample group here, certainly the GECG members are outperforming the UK at this point in time. I would say we've got, you know, a much larger respondents there than there would be, I would say, over 5% in the UK. So really interesting data coming through on that one. I don't know if anybody would add anything to that. Obviously, you know, again, certain markets, certain industries, you're going to have a bigger share of early careers hires as part of your workforce, others less so. So there are sectoral differences often as well. Okay, lovely. That was everything I wanted to cover off with you from a kind of early career talent team structure, in terms of giving you some data and sharing some of the insights from both UK data set and Faisal's recent survey. He's more than happy, if anybody did respond to it and would like to dig into that data or some of the responses more, he said he's more than happy for people to kind of get in touch and ask him what else he found. So please do feel free to reach out and make that connection. I think they're in the midst of quite a bit of assessment centre type stuff this week. So that's he couldn't be here in person, but he very kindly shared all those findings with us from his survey. Is there before we move on to our next session with Robert, is there anything anybody would like to ask me, or anything that you're thinking about in terms of your structures that we haven't covered off yet, or anything you'd like me to go back to? No? Okay, super. In that case then, I thought I would just kind of contextualize Robert's session, because Robert's going to start sharing his screen shortly. I'm just in terms of kind of setting it up for why we thought Robert would be a really timely and good speaker for us. We asked you at our last session together how we recruit and how we select for early careers talent as GECG members, and the big respondents, which you'll have just seen on the screen previously. The main ways in which we recruit people are by CV and supporting statement, and by interviews. So they're actually quite classical methods of recruiting people, and there's a lot of research to indicate that the kind of biographic information that we tend to rely on those interviews aren't necessarily good predictors or indicators of potential. What they are, in fact, is good indicators of whether or not somebody's been lucky enough to have great connections, they've got good family members, they've opened doors for them, they've had opportunities. And a lot of those skills and experiences can come from those. So we thought, well, this is really interesting to explore. What alternatives are there? What are the other things that you can do to select and identify potential? Who could we get to talk to us about that? And thus, we invited Robert. So over to you, 45 minutes now on recruiting for potential. I think there's going to be some really good stuff here to get us thinking and going. I'm looking forward to this, Robert. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and really nice to meet everybody here. So I'm Robert Newry, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Arctic Shores, and we've been in the world of psychometrics since 2014. And actually in the German market, psychometrics is often referred to as a diagnostic rather than a psychometric. And what I thought I'd share with you today in the sort of 30 to 40 minutes or so that we've got, and I'm happy to take questions. I don't know if you can raise a hand or something that will indicate that you want me to explain something a bit more, but I'm very happy to add further thoughts based on any questions you have as I go through. But what I thought I'd cover today is, first of all, what is potential? It's a sort of word that we throw around. Do we really understand it? And actually, has the term potential changed for the future of work with so many changes in the digital transformation that we have in many of our businesses? The second bit that I would cover based on your context around this, Rebecca, is how do we measure potential? And I'm very conscious looking at that stat that of the people that we have on this call, that some of you will be familiar with psychometric diagnostics and some not. So I will make sure that I cover a broad spectrum there and don't assume a lot of knowledge on this. And then last, I'll give you a real life case study of the German company Siemens that we've been working with for many years. and how they've been working with us in the UK, Germany, and several other countries actually in using our psychometric diagnostic to identify potential. So on that note, let's start with Arctic Shores and who are we? The first thing to understand is that we're the next generation of psychometric assessments. I'll explain what that means, but we don't do psychometrics in the way that you, if you have come across them, that you normally think about them, and I'll take you through that. But in the world of generative AI and ChatGPT, there's some really important things I'll be explaining to you as to why the next generation of psychometrics is really important with what's coming up. As I said, we've been around a long time, since 2014, and we've assessed over 3 million candidates across 40 countries. So hopefully that gives you some background to the credibility that we have when we're talking about this. And last but not least, you probably wonder, well, what do we do in the German market? And we don't have an office in Germany, but it remains a very important market for us. You'll be familiar with all these companies, but we do both graduate and Ausbildung programs across the board for all these companies. You'll note that obviously 3 of them are engineering led, and that the sectors that we cover largely are professional services, engineering, some IT, people who are interested in a sort of digital approach to it. Engineering has been very interesting for me because very data driven. And so their expectation is, how do we bring data in to make our recruitment process more robust? I will add that we do work with PwC in the UK, but in Germany, PwC insist on screening 70,000 applications for their various early careers programs manually. And they have a team, I mean, you were saying earlier, Rebecca, on this one, they have a team in Poland whose lovely job every year is to be literally looking through manually applications. And I'll take you through, as we go through, why I think there's a serious threat now with the way that things are advancing with generative AI. Not least just a candidate experience and efficiency piece around this. So, yeah, of course.
Out of interest, is the DACH region the only one that is doing that in EMEA for PwC, or was this?
Was what? Sorry, I couldn't hear you there.
Is the DACH region the only one doing that? Or are there other regions across Europe who are screening manually?
Oh, I see. Is the DACH region? So you're quite right. In Italy, it's quite often done in that way too, but it's not true across. In the Netherlands, Nordics, very strong users of psychometrics in early careers. France, increasingly so. It always surprises me, given how technologically advanced, particularly in the engineering sector, that Germany is. That the market there has been slower to adopt psychometric diagnostics compared to Netherlands, Nordics, and the UK. But I do sense that is changing now. So let's start with what is potential and how you should measure it. We have this sort of big assumption, we always understand what potential is. Well, I like this one because I think it lends us to why actually what we do in early careers is really important for experienced hire as well. Because in a world of digital transformation, we're going to be thinking about the skills we need in the future that we'll have to train up. So this thing about potential is really important. And so the analogy I like to use is that when we think about potential, it's roots, not leaves. And if you think of the leaves and the trunk in the tree is going to be your experience that you've built on the things that you have. And then the leaves are the hard skills that you've picked up, but they're perishable and they need to be retrained and they need to be updated. And potential then is the roots, it's the underpinning of a person. It's your personality, it's what you bring to work. and your intelligence. Now, what's interesting is that we talked a bit earlier about, we could, we should get early careers to work with our experienced hire and talent acquisition. If they understood this, they'd think about how you screen and select very differently. And when we think about the skills crisis and the skills that we want just aren't available in the market, not just early careers are going to be thinking about potential, but I think experienced hire, normal talent acquisition is too. So I share that because the things I'm going to give you today shows how important what you do and how you do it will be, not just for early careers, but I think actually for the success of your company going forward. So let's think about potential then. What do we mean by potential? Well, I alluded earlier that most people understand that as being personality and intelligence. Well, let's break that down a little bit. So what do we think about personality? Well, personality really is soft skills. Some people call them competencies. Ultimately, though, it is personality, and you can use different words for this, adapting, delivering, but it's important that you think about the words that mean something to your hiring managers, not just necessarily the psychometric terms for this, but ultimately it's personality, soft skills. Then we have intelligence, and I think intelligence is really interesting because I like to talk about workplace intelligence. Intelligence is not just, are you good at academic intelligence? Are you good at doing exams? Intelligence in the workplace is, how do you problem solve? How do you think critically? How do you learn about things? And that's important because what we need going forward then are these things about workplace intelligence, not academic ability. Academic ability shows you a different type of intelligence, which is less relevant, I think, to the future of work. And that's important to understand. So the big question then comes, if this is our understanding of potential, how best should we measure it? Is it CVs, or is it diagnostics, or is it a combination of both? And that's what I'll share with you now. It's an important question to be asking yourselves, is what's the best measure for potential? So let's think about it now. We live in a technological world, and surely we should have a technological solution to how we understand potential. And this is then what shocks me, is that when you say to people, and I bet you all the people on this call now, do you think CVs are the best way to understand potential? Are they accurate? Are they objective? Are they reliable? I can see the smiles on the screen here, and there's a big no. We know that is the answer. We know that they're none of those things. And yet we still use the CV and the application form as our first screening. Look at the data you shared on that, Rebecca, at the beginning. 11 out of the 13 respondents all use this. And yet we all know that it's not reliable. So why? Why are we stuck with this? And I think there are two reasons why we're stuck with this. One, it's what we've always been told. The CV is like it's embedded into our way of thinking. And secondly, is there an alternative that is accurate, that is objective, and that is reliable? And up till now, we've not really been sure about that. But I will share with you that we do have the answers to it. I think the final piece around this, which is the big shift, and I'm sure all of you are talking about this, and you're seeing it on LinkedIn, you're seeing it in your companies, is how open anything that is text-based is to manipulation by large language model, OpenAI, generative AI platforms that are out there now. And just in case you think, oh, well, Robert, that's all in the future, is this a big deal? Here's just one example of a website, and there's hundreds of them now. It's called Sidekick AI. You can go and load in your CV, your application form. You can then go and put in the job description, the career site of Siemens, eBay, whoever it is, Adidas. You can load them in there, and it will give you the perfect response based on your CV and what they are asking for. So if that technology sits out there now, how on earth are you going to differentiate with people in the future if all applications look really good? And it's cheap, and it's easy, and it's free. And the other thing about AI is it's learning very quickly. So it's only going to get better. It's only going to learn faster about how you can do this. And this is the one that really shocked me recently, is they're now, OpenAI have a piece of technology called Whisper, which enables the OpenAI framework to live transcribe your conversation. So to do it literally as you talk. And then there's a plugin here this is ChatGPT 3.5, and ChatGPT 4 is even better, but it'll give you a live, and it takes literally a fraction of a second, a live response to the question you've just been asked. So even a video interview now can be manipulated by ChatGPT. So this whole idea that we can sit and look at CVs and we can rely on is about to be blown apart over the next 12 months. So this is a really important thing for you to be thinking about. Yeah, Rebecca, I can see your hand up.
I was going to say, Robert, and I'm sure I've read something, and it might have been this version of Whisper that you're talking about there, where it won't just transcribe the interview question, but if you plug in your CV to it, your response will be tailored to the experiences that you've had as well.
Correct.
And the
Correct.
things you've studied or the places
Correct.
that you've worked. So it's completely personalized as well. Like as an interviewer, you wouldn't know that had been computer generated you know, was authentically their response, would you? It's quite scary.
So I think, you know, what this means is two things. One is we're going to have to find ways, clever ways of understanding people's potential using technology, but in a different way. And secondly, we're going to have to get people to a face-to-face interview in more quickly than we have done in the past. So that's the implications of this, that we need technology to do that differentiating in a fair, objective, reliable way. And then we need to get people, the right people, in front of a human interviewer as quickly as possible. So what is the solution to it? Oh yeah.
I was just going to say that's good news for all of us then, isn't it, as recruiters? That our human skills cannot be replaced that easily. Hurrah!
Definitely not. More important than ever. And I think that's the key thing about AI, is that it's how we use it alongside human skills. And I think that's a really lovely word too, Rebecca. I like human skills in this, because there is a difference between technological hard skills and human skills, which aren't going away. So the solution then to how do we deal with these challenges that I just shared with you? Well, clearly the answer is anything that's text-based, whether that's an application form, whether that is a personality that's question-based, anything that's text-based is not going to be the answer. The next generation of diagnostics around this is going to be task-based. And this is what Arctic Shores has been working on for many years now. It is giving people an interactive task. And I think I did see that FDM were on this call too, and FDM have been using this for their early careers for a number of years with us on this. But the point is it's task-based. So it is how do you respond to these tasks is how we learn about your personality. And ChatGPT and generative AI can't cheat this, because it doesn't know what we're measuring and how we're measuring, because what we're doing that is behind the scenes. We're picking up all the little different ways people approach these tasks. And that I think is going to be, you know, something for people to think about, that you can almost, like China, that sort of skipped from landlines to mobile phones. In Germany, you'd be able to do the same. You can skip through, you know, traditional psychometrics to next generation psychometrics in one leap now. So what's the key thing about this, the benefit then of next generation assessments? Because it's not just that it's ChatGPT proof. For me, why did I start the business? I started the business because I wanted to uncover potential. I wanted to find ways that we could learn about people in ways that sometimes they may not even know what their skills are. And that is a big thing in early careers that we all believe in, is how do you find that potential in people? And you don't give advantage to some people who've got money and can get extra help. So in this particular case, if we're measuring resilience, and that's something I come across a lot in early careers, and this lady here has a high resilience level. but she doesn't know that at this stage. She hasn't come from an environment where she's either tested her resilience or even people have told her that she's resilient. So when she gets asked in a question-based approach to this, she's going to give, well, what do they want to hear? Is this what I'd like to believe I am in terms of resilience, or is it actually what I think I am currently on this? And how do I compare myself to, and who do I compare myself to? And quite often you might get a result in self-report where somebody underrepresents, particularly women, particularly people from lower income brackets, will not be as confident and will underreport their capabilities. Whereas if you get data from real efforts, real things that they do, you will get their true, authentic potential. And that's what's as important to me as why I set up the company as it is that, you know, we can find a better way of understanding people than the traditional diagnostics. So for us, and back to your point, Rebecca, on this about human skills, these are the things that we should be measuring. And can we do it in a way that is fair and easy for people to do it? So you want from a menu of human skills, what are the ones that are most important? And how do we decide for different roles? That for a technical role will be different from a customer role, will be different from a marketing role. All of these things need to be molded and shaped for the different types of potential that we're looking for. And a good system will enable you to do that from a human skills and from an intelligence point of view. And then ultimately, as recruiters here, and you know, we were talking earlier a lot about the ratios of one recruiter to 50 vacancies. You've got to be able to do this in a way that you can stack rank the people that are coming through and see in terms of their human skills and their workplace intelligence, which are the ones that are a best match. And one of the things that we've seen from Siemens and a few others, is to the point you're making as well, Rebecca, on this about time to hire. So increasingly, if you want time to hire in 14 days, you want to see as applications come in, if there is great talent, people who make a great fit to what you're looking for, then you want to fast track them through the process and get them in front of a human as quickly as possible. And I think for a lot of brands that aren't well known, like, you know, if you are, and Siemens came to us, so they're not a Facebook, they're not a Google. And if you've applied to a Facebook or you applied to a Siemens, you're always going to be looking out at the Facebook email and saying, oh, have they got back to me? Whereas the Siemens one, you'll go, okay, well, if it's an 8-week time frame for me to apply on this, then, you know, I'll check it. And you may well have lost some great talent. So that's why the stack ranking. I can see, Kerry, you've raised your hand.
Yes, I have. Just on an interesting point on time to hire. So we are currently undertaking some research with females who are applying to graduate and intern level roles. And well, we'll tell you more about the background of the research, but one of the things that we can see from a question we're asking about why you would ghost an employer is that the biggest reason is that the process is taking too long and they disengage. And so that's what we're hearing from, you know, like you say, high potential women, you know, those who are engaged with Grad Fuel, who a lot of you met last time. So, you know, the ones we know are very focused on their performance, very focused on, you know, ambitious, and you know, we're losing those people. So I think it's a really good point to make about time to hire, Robert, and even the communication with the applicants as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in there for everyone.
No, really good and great point. And so the point is, you need something, there's a bit of data that tells you very quickly, is this person a good fit? And then quickly, how do I get them through to interview on this? And it's so much better than doing it through an application form. I think the other thing that you want from a good diagnostic system is reports and help with the interviews. For me, what's really important about getting objectivity and fairness into the process is that the face-to-face interview is as objective and focused on human skills as the initial screening process is. And so you want that information to flow from the initial screen to the interview. And one of the things around best practice that we're seeing globally around this is that transfer of information. And it's important from a candidate point of view, which is when I sit in front of somebody for an interview, I don't want them to be looking at my application as if they've just seen it for the first time and have no idea what my strengths are, when, hang on, I've just spent an hour filling in forms and telling you about how brilliant I am, and that almost doesn't count. And so what you want is that the interview is as focused on the things that you've advertised and said that they're important, rather than just the individual questions that come from a hiring manager. So I think that consistency in using the data through the process is another important value add. And then ultimately, I think if you're unfamiliar with diagnostics, you want a platform that is helping you, that is supported by internal ways of using chatbots to help you steer through it, but also subject matter experts. And I think, you referred at the beginning, Rebecca, this around occupational psychology and business psychologists, I think are very important in helping understand what success looks like. So the ultimate thing is, hopefully I've convinced you at this point, yes, this looks really interesting, Robert, but we're talking to a German audience here, and we like evidence and we like data, and we want to know, is this just some sort of English fantasy that sounds great, or is it based on some real hard evidence and studies? So I'm just going to give you one slide on this, and this I can share the paper from you on this. But the Schmidt and Hunter study that was originally done in 1998 is talked about through all the academic universities, whether it's from Dusseldorf to Birmingham to Harvard. They all looked at this original study to show that cognitive tests and personality tests are a great way of predicting performance. This was then updated in 2013 with another huge amount of data. And what it shows you is that the more that you use what they call multi-measure tests, which is a combination of personality, intelligence, if you can add in other things around motivation, but certainly adding in an interview as well, gives you a much higher predictor of whether that person will be successful. And the least, and this is why I made this point earlier, the least predictive in this is job experience. Look at that, 0.13. All your standard talent acquisition friends that in early careers on this, they rely on job experience on it. And yet the data, the evidence, and it's so compelling, shows that that is actually the least predictive. And we probably knew that anyway, but we didn't have anything else that we had. So this is hopefully one piece of independent data. I'm happy to share that with you, but this done on a huge amount of research and is done by academics, not by vendors. So let's go into a case study then. How has somebody implemented this, and what benefits have they seen? The problem, and interestingly, this was Siemens in the UK, where they wanted to employ an early careers type of approach to a junior role where somebody needed to have 2 or 3 years experience. So it's that very interesting gray area saying, and you were talking a little bit about this earlier, Rebecca, is this sort of gray area, 2 to 3 years of experience? Is that early careers? It's not really quite experienced hire? It's somewhere in the middle. Who looks after it? Actually, I think early careers can and have got a lot of value to add. But the case for Siemens on this, they had a vacancy for a project engineer that had been open for 200 days, and they'd had 12 applications. And when you looked at the job description, you could understand absolutely why. It was full, the job description was full of Siemens 3-letter acronyms about all the engineering automation platforms that they used. And somebody had to have all that experience. And I think probably there were only 20 people in the whole of the UK who had that. And half of them were working for competitors of Siemens anyway. And so they were scratching their head going, well, why can't we find anybody? Why are we getting so low applications? And it seems very obvious, but that is what a lot of people do. So we came in and just said, hang on, can you train people? My tree analogy on this, can you train people and give people all these things that you're saying, these hard skills? over a period of 6 months? And they said, yes, we can. We've got a very good learning and development program. We're Siemens. We're brilliant at this. I said, okay, well, why don't we hire then for potential and then train them up and see whether we can do a bit better than these 12 applications. And the managing director of Siemens was really interesting about this. He was completely bought into this. And he had a lovely phrase on this. To solve this, he wanted to, if everybody's recruiting from the same well in the same way, using the same bucket, then we're never going to, get an improvement on this. So we wanted to go to a different well with a different type of bucket. And this is where the whole hiring for potential, you don't need a previous experience, you don't need a CV to apply, kicks in. We took them through a 6-step process. I won't go through the detail of this. The important point about it is that to be successful in hiring for potential is not about whether you use Arctic Shores' diagnostic or not. What's important is that you have a process that is focused around potential. It's the process that's really important around this. And then the diagnostic and the technology you use should be to enhance that process, but it's process first, technology second. And we think this is a really important part. And I have a whole playbook that I wrote with 4 or 5 other companies, Cognizant and a few other software companies with their talent acquisition people as to how you can do this. And here were the results, which was really interesting. They were able to find their applications went from 12 to 300. They used a combination of application questions plus the Arctic Shores diagnostic, got that down to 60 that they then looked in more detail, and then they interviewed 8. And the interesting thing is that of the 8 that they came across, they could have hired all of them. They could have hired all 8 of them. They ended up hiring 2 rather than the 1. What was interesting, in the 8, one of them came from Kentucky Fried Chicken, one of them came from Aldi, which you'll all be familiar with, and one of them was an internal apprentice applicant who'd come in through a sort of blue-collar shop floor program into Siemens that they didn't realize how good that candidate was. And I think that was the thing that was really refreshing for them. I think the other thing about it was that they got through and this was a big Siemens goal, so through no positive discrimination, in the 8 people that they'd interviewed and doing it through using a diagnostic, they ended up with 4 women and 4 men. And the other thing that was interesting is that when they showed the CVs of these 8 people to hiring managers after the process, separately from this, the hiring manager said they would not have interviewed any of the 8. And that was kind of shocking, really, to them, was, the 8 were so good and they hadn't realized what this broader talent pool is. So the thing for Arctic Shores is, if you really get this process right and you understand potential and you broaden out what you want, and I think things like, you've got to have a certain degree or a certain qualification. I don't think that's relevant now, because you've got a diagnostic that will test these things much better. You can uncover what McKinsey called star candidates. And I really like this term, star candidates. So these are skilled through alternative routes. So this could be people who have self-taught. It could be for immigration, refugees who've come in, who've got amazing academic capabilities, but they're not in the normal German system, so you don't recognize them. There are so many. In America, I saw that the number of people through this was like 68 million people who aren't being tapped into because people don't understand what it means to recruit for potential and how you can do that. So I leave you then with my final thought, which is, how do we get from the 3 people in the who responded to your survey on that, Rebecca, to, who only use a different approach, to looking and experimenting. And the challenge I hope that I've been able to give you with here is that it's not something that you can bury your head in the sand and think I don't have to look at. You absolutely have to think about this now. ChatGPT and OpenAI and generative AI has changed the world around this, and you need to experiment. That's it. Oh, I have a question. Kate.
Just a question, how it would account for perhaps those who are neurodivergent or who have disabilities or, you know, perhaps mental health kind of issues. How would the system account for that? Because I'm just, I guess, conscious that if they're not able to kind of disclose that in person, then being in these new types of situations when an interview is already perhaps difficult could mean we miss some really good talent.
Absolutely, and great questions. And it's one of the things that's most important for me at Arctic Shores is broadening the talent pool, and that includes neurodiversity. What's interesting is that because we don't have, it's not question-based and it's not timed, certainly the personality element in what we do, we get really great feedback from the neurodiverse community. We've had some lovely comments from people who ADHD, dyslexic, dyspraxic, who have traditionally been rejected automatically because they're no good at the typical application process, whereas the Arctic Shores psychometric was able to uncover, and it does uncover some superpowers, because if you're neurodiverse, you actually look at the world differently, and you can actually have a very powerful critical thinking, problem-solving capability. And we bring that out because it's all based on tasks. So the results we get from neurodiverse is really good.
Of the test.
Sorry?
Would it be when you're doing the task? When you're doing the task, does it upfront tell you what it's assessing and what? Me personally, if it didn't have that, I would perhaps be disengaged.
Yes. So we upfront say to people, if you feel that you need any special accommodation, any requirements, let us know. And then we can explain, you know, how it works. We have a big candidate knowledge store as well, with a whole specific section on neurodiversity. How we tested for it, what a task-based assessment means, how you can approach it. The only thing that we can't cope with is if somebody's blind. It is a visual task-based, and in those circumstances, that requires usually a different accommodation in the recruitment process anyway. And we advise, in such a small number, that we advise that goes straight through to interview. Face-to-face interview.
Final piece, and then I'll let Armin go. Sorry.
Sure.
Just a quick piece regarding is it possible for them to do it on their phone or old computers? Because I know, especially from my side, I get a lot of candidates who are actually interviewing whilst at their job on a very outdated system because they themselves don't have a computer.
Correct. Absolutely. It's Arctic Shores started from a small screen perspective, unlike most psychometric companies, and so we've expanded it to make it suitable for all types of computers. But the most important thing is that we designed it expecting people to apply using a mobile phone, which most people do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Armin.
So, first of all, thank you very much for all the information. And as someone who was hired and developed for the potential, I love that what you do and your work. So it's great to see that there are measurements and processes to find out the potential. And as somebody from this side, I know how hard is it to explain somebody what you are able to do if you have no certification or whatever that can prove your ability. So that's a great thing. The question I have is, how do you deal with the challenges of the new generation? So the trend is moving toward one-click applications, as little effort as possible. The market is changing. Young people want companies to make it as easy as possible. How do you deal with these challenges?
Great question, Armin. And the answer to that is, if I'm going to put some effort in and invest in doing, some sort of test or assessment, then at least give me something back. And so we address that by giving a feedback report that's done in local language that then sets out, these are your strengths. This is what we've been able to learn about you. And every candidate, irrespective whether they get selected to move forward or not, gets that feedback report. And I think that's very, very useful, particularly if you explain up front in the career site, we want to understand what some of your hidden strengths could be. And the only way we can do that is to ask you to do something that's engaging, that's task-based. Every task is no more than 2 to 3 minutes, so it's not repetitive and boring. And as a result, we get high completion rates, typically in the high 80s, low 90% completion rates.
Cool. Great. Thank you very much. We're on mute, Rebecca.
You're on mute, Rebecca.
Sorry, I thought I just unmuted myself and I did it the wrong way around. So just on that note, Robert, I'm thinking about our university members here. I'm looking at lovely Dina. Sorry, I said hello to you in the chat. Nice to see you, Dina. Eloise, Michael, others who are here who work with students. Presumably this can also be like a good experience for students in terms of understanding their strengths from a personal development perspective, for thinking about, future preparedness for future recruitment processes and what they might look like. So this is also really relevant for our university members to know about and think about, and could be potentially providing their students with these types of experiences as well. Exactly
right. One of the things I'm looking at is, how do you take the strengths that Arctic Shores uncovers and the things maybe that they're not so good at, and then translate that to types of work activities that you'd be best suited to.
Oh, yeah, great for guidance and career conversations and
super
things.
Important, Rebecca. And it's the thing, the one thing that troubles me most is the number of people that apply for jobs that they're not suited to because they didn't know, because of their parents or their grandparents or their uncle, their aunt or their best friend said, oh, apply to PwC. No idea whether they're suited to that, whether they could be something that was actually, much better suited, but they just didn't know that's what their strengths were. And I think one of the things that we're talking about is, how do you use then that feedback to work with careers departments to say, okay, if somebody came in with this report, how would I then use that to help steer them in the right way?
Exactly. And just from a kind of, positive psychology perspective, if you go through that process and you get a report, regardless of whether you go on to get the interview or not, I've still got a report which tells me what my strengths are. But in this instance, you're telling me these are my strengths, and actually they're not a match to the strengths we need in this job.
Exactly.
But they could be great strengths for other roles. It's a really nice message to give to candidates, isn't it? Rather than you're not good enough for this job, it's these are your strengths, and those strengths actually don't match up to what we need. Doesn't mean you're not a brilliant candidate just for another opportunity. I'm thinking just from both sides of the fence, from like the candidate experience perspective, for employers having a really nice candidate experience, and from that kind of guidance perspective, it's a really nice way to frame it with people, isn't it? And as you say, uncover those hidden talents that they don't know about, they don't realize for themselves.
I think Armin raised a question, a hand.
Yes, sorry, Armin.
There.
No, I just make a thumbs up, but but only to add one thing. I think an incredible number of people would be grateful if they know what they can do and what they should do, because it's unbelievable how many of young people they didn't know what their strengths are. They didn't know what to do. And if you say, okay, I have an opportunity for you, it's like you can be a recruiter, for example, and then they say, but well, I don't know if I'm able to do it. So that would be a great opportunity for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think for me, I mean, if nobody's ever kind of experienced these task-based tests, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to conceptualize what they might be like, aren't they, Robert? So if anybody wanted to have a go at one or experience one, can they get in touch with you to understand what it looks like? That would be wonderful. And for anybody who's thinking like, how do you manage it? Armin's already like, yeah, I want my report. I bet Imran does too. I can see a few people like we all want to know what it's like, don't we experience it? But for those of you who haven't experienced it before, just to describe these types of activities, if you were measuring, for example, somebody's risk tolerance, I've done a task-based activity on that before where I was told you can keep inflating this balloon and when it gets to a certain level, it will pop. And it will just, or you can stop when it's still inflating, but it's up to you. So you can press it kind of up to 10 or 12 times, and sometimes it will pop at 5, sometimes it will pop at 12, sometimes it will pop at 8. Are you the kind of person who constantly goes to like 3 or 4 and says, no, I'm safe, I'm steady, that's fine, thank you? Or like me, do you go 10 every time? 10 every time. let's go 10 or 12. Let's push it. Let's see how many we can get. And interestingly, then, if you get an early pop early on in the exercise, do you then become a bit more risk averse and call your clicks down? So that's how these tasks kind of work. They're really quite interesting in terms of, it's real. It's a real thing you're having to think about. It's demonstrating your skills and your behavior. So if you're wondering, how does task-based assessment work? That's just one small example. And I know, Robert, your team do a whole raft of really interesting and clever things like that really get to see some of these skills in action, and like you say, things that you didn't know about yourself but you find out through the process. Sorry, Kate, I'm chatting. I can see your hands back up.
I'm like the opposite on that one, because like with anything like task-based, I do it all the way, but then in my work I'm the opposite. Because I'm like, it doesn't matter, it's a balloon, I want to see what happens, I want animation. But at work I'm like, no, this is real consequences, I should be like serious.
But it's interesting, I think when they know that they're doing it when they're applying for a job, that serious head comes on. Yeah,
not for me. I've done it myself, like on them, because it's, I don't know, it's like nothing bad will happen, because it's like the risk reward. So like I'm looking at it, one is the risk, one is the reward. I'm like, the reward is seeing what happens, but like I don't know, I wouldn't think of it as like the risk is I don't get the job, because like I would be like, that would make no sense. I would see the risk as nothing. There's no risk.
Sure. And what's interesting is that it's not just the absolute way that you take this. There's a big difference between people who experiment quickly, who experiment slowly, and we're picking up the micro shifts in your behavior. Naturally, what comes to your brain on this as your preferred way. And of course, we can all adapt at the workplace, but the point is, what's our preferred way? And then if we're put, as we will inevitably be, under pressure at work, it gets busier, you will always, you can actually adapt your behavior to a degree, but as you do something more regularly and you do it on a bit more pressure, then your natural preference will come over, or you will put yourself under more stress than you should do because you're having to constantly adapt your behavior. Now, what's interesting around this, of course, is that not everybody has to deal with risk in their job. And
it might not be relevant.
Exactly. So what's important here is for each of the different roles, what is the human skills that are important for it? And then the others are kind of interesting to have, and that's what provides a sort of richness of diversity in the organization. But to be successful in this role, these are the 4 or 5 things that you're going to be doing all the time and probably under pressure. And so you've got to be really comfortable in doing that.
And like you say, you can select different tasks that will assess them in different ways, can't you? It's, I love anything like this to kind of explore it and play with it. So yeah, any opportunity to kind of have a go at those things. Robert, I think just from the volume of questions we've had, we can tell this has been a really successful and interesting session. It's been a delight and pleasure. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And hopefully you'll be joining us at one of the upcoming in-person events so people can pick your brains even further. together. Lovely. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert. So I will now take us into the final section of today's digital meetup. Just to check, can everybody see my screen okay? Lovely, because I realised after we'd gone into Robert's session, there was one other piece of data from Faisal's survey that I didn't get to share with you. And I think it's a really interesting one for any of those of you. I know a few of you are thinking about, you know, your conversion from interns and students into permanent hires. So I thought this was I know, Kate, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. I was interested too. So this is, again, context, small sample, GECG members, but Germany early career specific. So it's useful in a broader context. We're looking at the percentage of your university talent that converts to permanent employees following on from their university program, be that post-placement or internship or working students or whatever it might be. More than 75% was a third of responses. I was really surprised it was that high, really, really high. 25 to 50 being the second most common, 50 to 75. So big conversion rates here. In the UK, you're looking at typically intern to graduate response rates, conversion rates about 55%, something like that across all different sectors. So this is, I think, probably in line, maybe a little bit higher than I was expecting. But again, useful data for you to share if any of you are working on that or trying to convince your business colleagues internally on how important it is to really get that conversion after you've invested all that time and energy in developing students and giving them a great experience and making them great ambassadors for the organization. So that was the last bit of data I wanted to share with you on that, which takes us nicely into our hot topics section. I'm going to split us into 3 groups so that we can have now our kind of confidential, no holds barred. Let's talk about the things that are on our minds that we need to pick other people's brains on. I thought it would be useful to just have a look again. We had so many hot topics ahead of our last session that we couldn't cover them all. And what we asked you to do at the last session was to upvote the ones that you were most interested in talking about. And these came out as our top 3. So use of ChatGPT and AI, Robert's already mentioned it. The ISE UK and NACE and SEGEA chats that I'm involved in globally at the moment are ablaze with discussion about this stuff. Friend of mine is a global early careers lead, and he said we started to get these really unusually specific, very well researched CVs coming through, but lots of similarities. And so we asked ChatGPT some of these questions, and funnily enough, that's what we got spat back out to us. So, and they, having done a bit of analysis, think about 30% of the applications they've received had those responses or elements of those responses in there that they could recognize. So a lot of people were anticipating this year and next year, see a lot of people pivoting away from cover letters and CVs into different forms of first assessment and the old-fashioned face-to-face human being interview. Whoa, coming back. Who could have seen that 15 years ago? Not me. You know, those asymmetric video interviews that a lot of us use, so easy to gamify, as Robert showed you. You can type the question in, ChatGPT gives you your instant answer. You can read it off. Recorded interviews now can be gamified in the same way the CVs can be. So that human interaction, our role and the critical nature of what we bring to this as recruiters, this is our time to shine in partnership with the brilliant human skills that we bring alongside choosing the right technology to partner us. I think it's a really exciting time the next couple of years. And I think we're going to see a big tip and a big change. Intern salaries was another thing that people wanted to chat about. Yeah, what we're paying them, what we're thinking this year. Everybody's interested in what everybody's thinking. Cost of living really biting for a lot of students. A lot of businesses held back on intern salaries and graduate salaries last year because they were uncertain about the economic forecast. But cost of living is really biting for students and they're asking for a bit more. So are you going to be doing something this year? Are you thinking about changing that at all? And then talent communities and how they're being used was our third most upvoted topic. Now, clearly we're not going to be the hot topic police. You can talk about whatever you like. But what I wanted to do was just give you some kind of food for thought, really, to get your hot topic groups going. Now, we did say at the top of today that we were going to offer up the option of having a German language room if anybody would prefer to have their hot topic conversation in German rather than in English. So if anybody would prefer to do that, please just give me a shout now or give me a wave and I can put you in a room together. Alternatively, I can randomly allocate you into a mix of universities and employers and other people into each room and see who you find yourselves with. Do we have any preferences? Is everybody happy just to be shaken up and meet some new folks, or would anybody like to or prefer to have a German language room for discussion? Everybody's happy just to be shaken up? Okay. Wonderful. In that case, then I will invite you all now to go and join one of those rooms. Please do start with some introductions if there's folks you don't know. And we look forward to seeing you back here shortly before on the hour. So you've got a good chunk of time now just to enjoy some discussion with one another. We'll see you all soon. Kerry, is there something we need to add?
Yes, I was just going to say I'm going to stop the recording here
Yes.
as promised earlier. And obviously, if anyone needs a quick bathroom break or comfort break before you go into the breakout rooms, then please do feel free to do so.
Lovely.
Yeah, see you all soon.
Wonderful. Your invitations will be with you shortly. Enjoy your discussions. We look forward to seeing you.